The first, I always wonder about historical comparisons and just how helpful they are. Because certainly, as we talk about, fighting the Fed and whatnot, I bring up Volcker a lot about what Volcker did back in the early 80s and how he was able to raise interest rates and really crush inflation for, pretty much close to 40 years. And obviously those circumstances were different coming off of the 70s, the oil embargo, labor unions were obviously a lot stronger, but yet, okay, here is a Fed, raising interest rates to get inflation under control. Okay, so how about now? Because now we're talking about a pandemic. We're talking about a monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus of unprecedented proportions. So, is historical comparisons helpful or not really?
I think they're helpful, but I think you need to be really careful about what comparisons you're using. A lot of people, and I'll say, we look at the Fed too in terms of the 1970s, what Volcker did, and this is a lot of people are asking this year, Jerome Powell, the chair of the Fed, is he going to be the next Paul Volcker, or is he going to be the next Arthur Burns, who's the other Fed chairman during the 1970s, who blinked, who stepped back when inflation was still running high, when they were trying to tamp it down, but economic pain came. They defaulted, they went towards the economic side, inflation took off. However, when I'm looking at the economic fundamentals and I think about what happened, how the money entered the system, what the ramifications look like, I would say that the best reference period for what the fiscal stimulus impacts are is back in 1942, 1943. It's when we fought the war. I mean, think about this. In the 1970s, as you mentioned, the oil embargo, we had the labor unions, it was the Great Society, right? LBJ. There were entitlement reforms, which meant there was more money coming in, and it continued to come in higher and higher over a number of years. What we saw in 2020 into 2021 was a spike, a quick spike, and then a quick drop-off in spending, which is exactly what we saw around World War II. And just like with World War II, think about this for a moment. When we fought the war, we changed factories over. We shut down some of the businesses because we needed to make tanks, planes, munitions, and that impacted output from the economy on a lot of other goods and services. In 2020, we shifted to the goods side of the economy. We moved away from services. As we got out of World War II, people came home, soldiers had money to spend, but we still needed a transition time to get the businesses back up and running, to get the workers back up and running. So we ran through a period of higher inflation as essentially we absorbed that money that had entered the system. I think that is a decent reference period for what we're going through today. However, there's another critical change, and that's how the central bank operates. If you go back any time really in central bank history prior to the financial crisis, the central bank worked with the banks, the JP Morgans, the Banks of America, Wells Fargo. The way they tried to control lending activity and the money entering the system is that these banks didn't really hold reserves. They hold just enough money to make the loans that they were extending. If they wanted to extend new loans, they borrowed from the central bank. So the central bank could choose, add more money, add less money. And that was how they influenced rates. That's how they influenced lending activity. That's what Volcker used. He jacked up that borrowing rate, made it restrictive for banks to access money to make new loans, and that money creation stopped. When we did the QE program back in the financial crisis and we added to it in COVID, we added so many reserves to the system that old methodology of managing finances for the central bank changed. And the tools they have tools. Now, instead of charging them in order to borrow money, we pay them not to lend the money. And that, it does have some influence, but it's less precise. It's gotten less precise. It's more blunt force impact. And so quite honestly, they can try to follow the Volcker method, but it's going to work with a bit of a numbing effect.